Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it's a pleasure to speak in this debate on financial services and to speak in such a well-informed and thoughtful debate. First, on the contribution of the financial services sector, I don't want to repeat what's already been said by the member for South Cambridgeshire and others about the tax paid, the growth, the jobs, but I would like to bring up something that hasn't yet been discussed, which was actually the contribution during the acute phase of the COVID pandemic in 2020. About £75 billion was facilitated through the UK financial services sector. And just to illustrate what that really means, in a constituency like mine, which doesn't have a huge number of businesses compared to many other constituencies, over £100 million were facilitated through the financial services sector for businesses in my constituency. It just is a practical way of showing the impact, the positive impact that the financial services sector can have on the lives of our constituents. Another thing to discuss is to talk about competitiveness. Now, competitiveness has already been mentioned by many speakers. I support what the Treasury wants to do in terms of adding growth and international competitiveness as a secondary obligation for the FCA and the PRA. I support the action in the budget to reduce the bank surcharge on banks in particular, because had we left the bank surcharge where it had been, it would have made, from a tax perspective, the UK one of the most expensive jurisdictions in the world to operate a bank, and that is not in the UK's national interest. And I support the work that the Hill Review did on listings, on the general approach to public markets, the share trading obligation, the double volume cap. A lot of these technical things, I think the government is in the right place on. We're going in the right direction. We're doing the right things. And as many others have said, the Minister is doing a great job. What I would add is, in relation to ring fencing, I give a confession, Madam Deputy Speaker. Before I came to this House, I spent some time at HSBC and I worked in restructuring, and I had a lot to do with ring fencing. And I can say with bitter personal experience that it is deeply complicated. It was well-intentioned, but I think a review is overdue. I'm very glad that the government is going to look at it. And I would ask the government to look at this not just in the context of has it done a reasonable job so far, but look to the asymmetry of how ring fencing is imposed upon UK domiciled banks compared to our competitors, because the nature of it and the sheer complexity and cost associated with it, not just in terms of compliance and what we think of as regulation, but in terms of the IT systems, in terms of where people are, in terms of how the buildings operate. You know, it costs a considerable amount of money and a huge amount of focus for a big bank like HSBC or Barclays and various others. So I think that review, without prejudging any outcome, is critically important. I'd also like to pick up something said by the member for Kensington about trade deals. Now, this government, and indeed the country, is right in pursuing our strategy on trade internationally, looking beyond Europe, seeking to strike as many good trade deals as we can across the world. We need to make sure that those trade deals are best in class. And how I think of as best in class today in the modern world has to include services, and it has to include financial services and other professional services, not just because it's a good thing for this country, but because the nature of modern international trade is increasingly moving towards services rather than goods, particularly for advanced Western economies like our own. And I think we have a great opportunity to pioneer that at an international level, and in particular for our regulators, the regulators would need to seek to have many more regulator-to-regulator exchanges across the world as part of those trade deals, because a lot of the regulations that are in place in relation to financial services often happen at sub-national levels. So it's so important that our regulators do that, though, you know, the regulator-to-regulator exchanges, you know, I'm sure will be very good fun indeed for all concerned. What I'd like to finish on is somebody, forgive me, it was the member for Wimbledon, who's very experienced in these matters, talked about levelling up, and he talked about the regional positive aspect. of financial services sector and the jobs it creates outside London and the South East, and I completely agree with that. But how I think of levelling up is actually not so much about levelling up places, but levelling up people. And it's about people's opportunities. And I think the financial services sector, alongside all the technical work that we've already talked about with regulations and ring fencing and double volume cap and listing in public markets and prospective directives and all this stuff, alongside that, I think the sector and the industry needs to do more, and I think can do more, around levelling up in the United Kingdom. And what does that look like for the financial services sector? I think that means the industry doing more on alternative routes into the sector, on apprenticeships and others. I think it means the industry doing more, not so much providing more jobs outside London and the South East, though that's always welcome, but helping to develop regional clusters in around Edinburgh, around Leeds, around Bournemouth, various other places where there are significant numbers of financial services jobs, but what more can the industry do to develop those regional clusters to give more opportunities to people from all over the country and from different backgrounds? I'd also like to briefly mention debt advice for those who found themselves in problem debt. After the COVID pandemic, I think we all recognise that debt for some people has grown significantly, and I think there's more that the industry can do to work with people with problem debt and help them get out of that situation with the help of the legislation that is already in place. And finally, in relation to SMEs and access to finance, it's something that if the member for Thirsk and Moulton were here, I'm sure he would subscribe and talk about. And I don't want to steal his thunder, but it's not just small and medium-sized businesses getting access to debt. It's about small and medium-sized businesses getting access to equity finance and underrepresented groups who are entrepreneurs, often from ethnic minorities or women, making sure that they get more and better opportunities to raise funds for their businesses. And that is the core skill set, the core determinant of a financial services sector, providing funds for people to realise their aspirations as individuals or as part of a business. So I would urge the sector, and I'll be doing some more work on this in the new year, as the Minister knows, but it's to urge the sector to do more on that levelling up agenda in its broadest sense, in addition to working with the government, me and other colleagues and people here on the technical regulatory aspects that we know are critical for our international competitiveness.